Hello everyone, welcome. It's great to have you here with us on this Easter day. I'm Warwick, I'm one of the pastors here at Fellowship, and most Easters we're down there on that beautiful stretch of sand between the palaces, thousands of people gathering as the sun comes up to remember that Jesus rose from the dead. But not this morning. This morning you're at home with coffee in hand, and me, I'm on my balcony, and we're here because over the past few months, the entire planet has been given a massive wake-up call. A wake-up call about death. A reality check about our relationship with death. For you see, over the past 70 years, since the discovery of penicillin, since vaccines have become widely available and infant mortality has dropped and modern medicine has done its magic, our expectations have changed. We expect to outlive our parents. We expect to be able to pop a pill and feel better in the morning. We don't expect to die. Death has become something that we've rarely thought about. Our own death's off the agenda. Sure, it was sad when an elderly relative died, but we've been able to keep death at bay, at arm's length. My generation and the ones below, we've lived as if we were invincible. We've never expected that we'd suffer. Death for us, it's been hidden, hushed up. It's become the great unmentionable. And so death terrifies people. It especially terrifies those of us for whom this life is the only life, for it threatens to take away all that they have. And in the cold hard light of day, for most of us, that's not much. And the really sobering thing about COVID is that it keeps showing us up, keeps showing us just how out of control we are, showing us how little control we have, how little power we have to stop death. This Easter morning, I want to take us back to another Sunday morning when another group of people were confronted by death and were also afraid. They'd been shown up by recent events to be out of control, powerless. Come back with me to that first Easter morning when Jesus rose from the dead that we heard about in the reading that Caroline brought to us from Matthew chapter 28. Let's meet a couple of women who had been there 2 nights beforehand when Joseph had wrapped Jesus' body in a shroud and laid it in his own tomb. They'd seen Joseph roll that great stone in place. And so we read in chapter 28, verse 1, after the Sabbath, at dawn, on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to the tomb. I'm not sure what they were thinking, what they thought they would see when they got to the tomb. But I guess they were a little bit surprised by what happened. Verse 2, for there was a violent earthquake. And I reckon they were more surprised when they saw the reason for the earthquake. An angel of the Lord came down from heaven. And let me say, that is quite an entrance, especially when we see what he did next. Going to the tomb, he rolled back the stone and sat on it. And he was dressed for the occasion. His appearance was like lightning. His clothes were as white as snow. Now, it wasn't just the 2 Marys and the angel who were there that morning. For the previous day, we read in chapter 27 that Pilate the governor, he'd ordered, take a guard, go and make the tomb as secure as you know how. So they went and made the tomb secure. How? By putting a seal on the stone and posting a guard. Well, fat lot of good that was, the stone, the seal, the guard, all blown away by one well-dressed angel. And the soldiers, we're told, they were so afraid of the angel that they shook and became like dead men. Can you picture the scene? On one side, we've got the soldiers comatose with fear. On the other, the women probably terrified. And then there's the angel, probably looking fairly relaxed, perched on his stone. And verse 5, he said to the women, do not be afraid, for I know that you're looking for Jesus who was crucified. In other words, I know why you came out here at the crack of dawn. I know what you're up to. You're looking for Jesus, the one who was crucified, the one whose body you saw Joseph wrap in a shroud and lay in that tomb on Friday evening. You're looking for that one. Well, here's the news. And with just 3 short phrases, the angel totally changes humanity's relationship with death. The angel said, he's not here. He has risen just as he said. He's risen. But when the angel arrived with the earthquake and opened the tomb, Jesus had already gone. He'd already risen, defeating death just as he said he would. This past week I had a quick flick through Matthew's biography of Jesus, his gospel, and without trying I found 7 explicit references where Jesus told his disciples that the Pharisees, the religious leaders, would hand him over, that he'd be crucified, that he'd die, and then on the 3rd day he'd be raised from the dead. Now, 1 reference you could dismiss. 2, it's getting serious, but 7 times Jesus made this claim. And his enemies knew about it. See, after Jesus had been buried, the chief priests and the Pharisees went to Pilate and they said, "Sir, we remember that while he was still alive, that deceiver said, 'After 3 days I will rise again.'" Oh, that, by the way, is an 8th time it's referred to in Matthew's Gospel. Come with me and see that everyone knew. Everybody knew what Jesus claimed he'd do, which is why the stone and the seal and the soldiers, they were put in place. Everyone knew, everybody knew what Jesus had claimed for himself. Just 7 days earlier, Jesus had audaciously ridden into Jerusalem to claim the temple as his own, to claim his throne, to claim his crown as the Messiah, the great King who would rule the whole of creation for the whole of time. Which you can't do, by the way, if you can't rule over death. For you can't rule for the whole of time if you haven't defeated death. Everybody knew. The problem for the Pharisees was that Jesus wasn't a deceiver. He was absolutely telling the truth. And the evidence is pointed out by the angel. Look at verse 6. We read, "Come and see the place where he lay. He's not there." These wrecks of quivering soldiers and the seal and the stone, they were all in place when I spectacularly arrived, and Jesus had already gone. He's not here. He has risen just as he said. Then the angel said to the women, "Go and tell his disciples quickly. Go and tell them. He has risen from the dead. He's going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him." Now the women themselves, they didn't have to wait that long to have more than the angel's word for the resurrection. Remember what we heard next, verse 8. "So the women hurried away from the tomb, afraid yet filled with joy. And they ran to the disciples, but they didn't get very far because suddenly Jesus met them. 'Greetings,' he said. And they came to him and they clasped his feet. They did the only appropriate thing, the only appropriate response to the one who had conquered death. They worshipped him. And by that, I don't think they got out their guitars, drums and a smoke machine and sang some songs. Rather, they recognized him for who he was, God in the flesh. They worshipped him. They responded to him as God himself, who would come in the flesh, who would come to claim his temple. They responded to him as he was, the Messiah, the great King who has power over everything, even death itself. They fell at his feet and they worshipped him. And then for the second time, we hear the words, verse 10. Jesus said to them, "Do not be afraid." To come face to face with death is confronting. However, to come face to face with God himself, to come face to face with the one who has conquered death, to come face to face with the one who has the power to defeat death, that takes fear to another plane altogether. And that's what makes Jesus just so wonderfully comforting. His words. Do not be afraid. You, ladies, had every reason to fear death, but you have nothing to fear from me. And as the rest of the New Testament makes clear, you and I, we have nothing to fear from Jesus, because the power over death that Jesus has, he has it for our good. You see, he died to pay the penalty for our sin, that is our rebellion against God. Every single one of us, we've sinned, we've rebelled, we've given God the finger. And the penalty for that is always death. But Jesus, he lived the perfect life. And just 3 days earlier, he was crucified on a Roman cross and died the perfect death to pay one man at one time for all people at all time their penalty for sin. He defeated death by taking our death penalty off the table. He did that for us. And he rose as the guarantee that we too with him will be raised from death. His resurrection is our guarantee that this life is not all that there is. His resurrection is our guarantee that death will not have the final word, that there is someone more powerful than death who promises to give us life. Life now free from the punishment of sin, free from the fear of death. Life now with the promise of eternal life to come in our hands, with the promise of so much more guaranteed to us if we just take these promises to heart. If we just look to the risen Christ and see his promise of forgiveness and the certainty of his resurrection as ours. And then everything changes. And the promises of forgiveness, the promises of resurrection, those promises profoundly change how we live in the face of coronavirus. Stop with me for a moment and think. As I look around, as I watch people struggling with the virus and the fear that it's brought, I can see 3 types of people. And I wonder if you're one of them. There are those who look at death and say to themselves, well, this life is all there is. There is nothing else. You die and then you're gone. If that's you, can I ask you this? Why the fear? Why are you so afraid of death? Why in the last few weeks has the fear of death peaked in your life? Why is it still there? If you really want to say this life is all there is, there's nothing else, you die and then you're gone, let me ask you this. Is that claim just bravado? Is it just a veil that you put up for the benefit of others, a veil that you put up that you can place your fear of death behind? Because you see, I suspect that in our heart of hearts, we all know that there is something else. We know that there's more, and I want to suggest to you that Jesus' resurrection proves it. The second type of person is the one who's trying to really tough out COVID-19. They're washing their hands more than they have in their entire life. They're social distancing like the best of them. They're waiting for the vaccine, hoping that 18 months passes quickly, all in a vain attempt to kick death down the road. Put it off till later, not really wanting to have to deal with or think about it now. If that's you, let me read the words of my colleague, Stephen McAlpine. He recently wrote about normal death, and he said this. He wrote, normal death is not in lockdown. Normal death is not following government directives. Normal death is not waiting and watching for the latest updates from the relevant authorities. Normal death didn't stockpile humans like toilet paper. You see, normal death was confident that there would be plenty of humans left over for after the virus had done its job. Normal death went about its daily life doing what normal death always does, killing people. Be assured, normal death services have been resumed as normal. You and I, we may kick death down the road for a bit, but death is coming for us because the punishment for our sin must be paid, and death is far more powerful than you or me. So let me ask you, what will you do when normal death comes knocking at your door? It will overpower you. We cannot win. We cannot defeat it. Only Jesus' death can pay the penalty that you owe for your sin. The third group of people that I want us to see are those who, over the last few weeks, have been confronted by the certainty of death and are wrestling with Jesus' resurrection as a reality. For some of us, we'll wrestle with that by checking out the evidence for ourselves, possibly for the first time. Let me say there are a number of ways that you can respond to the resurrection. Let me outline just three. Firstly, you could pick up a Bible and read one of Jesus' biographies. Matthew, Mark, Luke or John, that's their names. You can grab a Bible online or pick up a paper copy. Trust me, they don't bite. They're not hard to read. Start with one of those biographies, Matthew, Mark, Luke or John. Listen to the eyewitnesses and engage with what they saw, and then ask yourself, is it true? And if you're still not sure, the second thing you can do if you really want to wrestle with the resurrection is simply Google. Google evidence for the resurrection of Jesus. I did it the other day, and on the first page there were several really good sources that outline what the evidence is, help you to understand it, and then show why it's compelling. What have you got to lose other than the fear of death? Go on, give it a go. Finally, thirdly, if you're someone who's recognized the fear of death in your own heart and you've looked at the evidence and you've been convinced that Jesus died and paid for your sin, that he rose and that he's conquered death, isn't it about time to start living as if this life isn't all there is? Isn't it about time to start loosening your grip on this life and start laying down your life for others, for the sake of others? Isn't it time to stop allowing fear to drive your responses to others? It really is time to let the certainty of the resurrection enable you to live quite recklessly. Recklessly knowing that death doesn't rule, but that Jesus does, and that he will raise you from death on the last day when he returns. Friends, today is Resurrection Day. If ever there was an Easter when we needed to be reminded that death had been defeated, it's this year. So let me ask you, will you live as somebody who knows Jesus, knows his defeat of death, or are you going to be the one who tries to kick death down the road and put it off till another day? This Easter, do yourself a favour. Let Jesus deal with your death once and for all.